Hey there, muscular peoples and really tall steeples. Hey everybody, my name is John and welcome to ADITW, a day in the Word, the internet's favorite Bible study. All right, it's that time again. Today we are diving in, I don't know what that was, I'm sorry. Today we are diving into 1 Kings chapter 2. For those of you who didn't join us last week, as we started our 1 Kings study, please do yourself a favor. Stop watching this video right now. Go back, watch 1 Kings chapter 1, and then come back here and start playing it right here, because we're going to move forward. Yeah. Let's start with our reading. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse, where am I starting? 1, verse 1. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 says this: When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth, he said. Be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. So what we have here is we have a father's parting instructions to his son. David, he is about to pass away. He is about to die. And these are sort of his final words, his final, as my Bible says, charge to Solomon, his son. And he basically gives his son 4 instructions. He says, be strong and act like a man. He tells him to observe what God requires. He tells him to walk in obedience to God. And then he says to keep God's decrees and commandments. And after he does all this, he sort of reiterates the promise that God gave to him so many years ago, that if Solomon does all of these things, if Solomon obeys the decrees and commands, if Solomon continues to walk in obedience to God, then he is going to prosper in all that he does. Now, I understand that the word prosper or prosperity actually has a pretty negative connotation, probably, for many Christians who are watching this show, because we often hear the phrase prosperity gospel. This idea that if I obey God, then God's gonna bless me. Meaning, if I obey God, then God's gonna buy me a house. If I read my Bible, then God's gonna buy me a car. If I pray every day, then God's gonna get me a pony. But you see, the difference between the promise that David is talking about here and prosperity gospel is that prosperity gospel is all about prosperity in our way. Whereas this type of prosperity that David is talking about, it's about prosperity within God's will. And God does not promise prosperity in our way. God promises prosperity in his will. And as exemplified here by David in his charge to Solomon as he's about to die, it is our obedience in God's will that leads to prosperity in God's way. So again, we're not talking about prosperity here on earth. We're not talking about nice cars and big houses and great clothes and huge bank accounts. What we're actually talking about, the prosperity that we're really talking about when we are obedient to God, God promises that we will prosper in his way. When we're walking in the paths of God, God promises we are going to prosper on those paths because that's his will. That's his plan for our lives. And never will we prosper more than when we are walking in the paths and in obedience to God. Last week, you should recall, because you went back and watched it, we talked about setting ourselves up in our own way rather than allowing what God has set up for us to be our path. And this week's lesson is a bit of a continuation of that. When we try and set ourselves up in our own way, we may prosper for a while. But it's not worth it if we're not prospering on the paths and in the will and in the way of God. Because this earthly prosperity that we're talking about, that's just temporary. It's a glass house. It will one day shatter and crumble around us. But the promise for those of us who are patient enough to wait for whatever God has set up for us, for those of us who are obedient enough to walk that path, prosperity in God's way is promised to those of us in Scripture. Hey y'all, thanks once again for watching this episode of ADITW. I hope it encouraged you. If it did, please give it a like, give me a comment down below. I love your comments. I love responding to them. I would love to hear from you how this book of 1 Kings is already encouraging and growing your faith. Also, if you like this video, if you like what we're trying to do on this channel, then please consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. There are hundreds of you out there who for just $1 a month help this channel go and help this channel grow to reach and encourage more people around the world. So if you believe in what we're trying to do, just click that Patreon link down below and you can help us continue to grow here. That is all I have for you today. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you all next week for another episode of ADITW. I love you all. Keep being awesome.